Sometimes the most dangerous people in the world are hiding in plain sight, wearing torn clothes and carrying everything they own in a shopping cart. Sometimes a single moment of cruelty reveals more about a person's character than a lifetime of achievements. And sometimes, when powerful men think they're untouchable, life has a way of teaching them the most humbling lessons through the most unexpected teachers. Admiral Richard Hawthorne was about to learn that respect isn't earned through rank alone, and that the woman he was about to mock had more confirmed kills than his entire naval squadron combined. What started as a routine visit to a military ceremony would end with a revelation that would shake him to his very core and change everything he thought he knew about honor, service, and sacrifice. This is the true story of how one man's arrogance collided with one woman's incredible hidden past, and how a chance encounter outside a veteran's memorial would expose secrets that had been buried for over 2 decades. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the National Veterans Memorial as Admiral Richard Hawthorne stepped out of his black sedan. At 58 years old, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had never been told no, never been challenged, and certainly never been made to feel small. His chest gleamed with ribbons and medals, each one a testament to a career spent mostly behind desks, managing logistics and political relationships rather than facing any real danger. The memorial ceremony was set to begin in an hour, and Hawthorne had arrived early to ensure everything was perfect for the visiting foreign dignitaries. As the ceremony's main organizer, he took pride in these events, seeing them as opportunities to showcase American military might and his own importance within the naval hierarchy. His polished shoes clicked against the stone as he surveyed the area, mentally checking off items from his preparation list. That's when he first noticed her. Sitting on a bench about 50 yards away was a woman who looked completely out of place among the pristine memorial grounds. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with graying hair that hadn't seen a professional stylist in months. Her clothes were layered and worn, the kind of practical outfit someone might wear when they weren't sure where they'd be sleeping that night. A small shopping cart sat beside her, filled with what looked like her entire worldly possessions wrapped in plastic bags and old blankets. Hawthorne's jaw tightened as he watched her. This was exactly the kind of problem he didn't need today. Important people would be arriving soon, including Senator Morrison and the British naval attaché. The last thing he wanted was for them to see some homeless vagrant loitering around the memorial. It would reflect poorly on his organizational skills and attention to detail. The woman seemed oblivious to his growing irritation. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, staring up at the memorial wall where thousands of names were etched in black granite. There was something peaceful about her posture, almost reverent. But Hawthorne was too focused on the potential embarrassment she represented to notice the respect in her demeanor. He pulled out his phone and considered calling security, but decided to handle the situation himself. After all, dealing with undesirable elements was part of leadership, and he prided himself on being direct and efficient. He straightened his uniform jacket and walked over to the bench, his footsteps deliberately heavy to announce his approach. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the crisp authority he'd cultivated over decades in the military. "This area is going to be restricted in about an hour for an official ceremony. I'm going to have to ask you to move along." The woman looked up at him, and for a moment, Hawthorne was struck by her eyes. They were a pale green, unusually clear and alert for someone he'd assumed was probably dealing with addiction or mental illness. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at him, as if she was seeing right through his uniform and medals to something he'd rather keep hidden.
"I'm not causing any trouble,"
she said quietly. Her voice was steady, educated even, which surprised him. "I'm just paying my respects." "Well, you can pay your respects somewhere else," Hawthorne replied, his tone becoming more condescending. "This is a place for real veterans, people who actually served their country. We can't have every homeless person who wanders by thinking they can just set up camp here." The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. It was subtle, like the way water looks just before it starts to boil. She glanced at his chest full of ribbons, then back to his face. "Real veterans," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "That's right," Hawthorne said, mistaking her quietness for submission. "People who actually put their lives on the line, not people who are looking for handouts or sympathy." He gestured dismissively at her shopping cart. "I'm sure there's a shelter somewhere that can help you, but this isn't the place for it." Other early arrivals were beginning to gather near the memorial entrance, and Hawthorne was very aware of being watched. This was his moment to demonstrate leadership and decisiveness. He needed to wrap this up quickly and professionally. "Look," he said, softening his tone slightly in what he thought was a show of magnanimity. "I'm not trying to be cruel here. I understand that life can be difficult, and I sympathize with whatever circumstances brought you to this point. But today is about honoring the sacrifice of real American heroes, and having you here sends the wrong message." The woman stood up slowly, and Hawthorne was surprised by her height. She was nearly as tall as he was, and despite her worn clothing, she moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost military in its precision. When she was fully upright, she looked him directly in the eye for a long moment. "Real American heroes," she said, and there was something in her voice that made Hawthorne suddenly uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Exactly," he said, trying to regain his sense of authority. "People who wore the uniform with honor, who served with distinction, people who earned the right to be here." The woman picked up a worn leather jacket from her cart and slipped it on. As she did, Hawthorne caught a glimpse of something that made him pause. On the back of the jacket, barely visible beneath the years of wear and fading, was a patch. He couldn't make out all the details from where he stood, but it looked military in nature. "You know," the woman said, adjusting the jacket around her shoulders, "you're absolutely right about one thing. This place should be for people who earned the right to be here." She looked up at the memorial wall again, and her voice took on a distant quality. "People who know what it really costs to serve." Something about her tone made Hawthorne want to end this conversation and walk away, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of the growing crowd of onlookers. Several junior officers had arrived and were watching the exchange with interest. "I'm glad we understand each other," he said, louder than necessary so the observers could hear. "I'm sure you can find somewhere more appropriate to spend your time." The woman nodded slowly and began pushing her cart away from the bench. But as she passed him, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "Admiral," she said, and the way she said his rank made it sound like an insult, "enjoy your ceremony. I hope it makes you feel like the hero you think you are." Before Hawthorne could respond, she was walking away, her cart wheel squeaking slightly on the stone pathway. He watched her go, feeling oddly unsettled by the entire encounter. There had been something wrong about the whole interaction, something that didn't fit the narrative he'd constructed in his mind about who she was and why she was there. Captain Jennifer Walsh, one of his staff officers, approached as the woman disappeared around a corner of the memorial building. "Everything all right, sir?" Walsh asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with what she'd witnessed. "Just handled the minor security issue," Hawthorne replied, straightening his uniform again. Can't have vagrants disrupting the ceremony. But even as he said it, he found himself thinking about the woman's eyes and the way she'd looked at him, like she knew something he didn't. "Did you notice anything odd about her?" Walsh asked hesitantly. "Odd how?" "I don't know, sir. Something about the way she carried herself. And that jacket she was wearing looked like it might have been military issue at some point." Hawthorne waved dismissively. "Probably found it in a dumpster somewhere. These people pick up all kinds of things." But Walsh's observation nagged at him as they walked back toward the memorial entrance. As the morning progressed and more officials arrived for the ceremony, Hawthorne found himself distracted. He went through the motions of greeting dignitaries and reviewing the program, but part of his attention kept drifting back to the strange homeless woman. There had been something familiar about her, though he couldn't place what it was. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch. Senator Morrison gave a rousing speech about American military excellence. The British attaché offered gracious remarks about Allied cooperation, and Hawthorne himself delivered what he considered to be a particularly eloquent address about the importance of honouring those who had made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom. But throughout the entire event, he found himself scanning the crowd for any sign of the woman. She hadn't returned, which was exactly what he'd wanted, so why did her absence bother him so much? It wasn't until the ceremony was over and the dignitaries were departing that Hawthorne noticed Colonel Martinez from Marine Intelligence standing near the memorial wall, studying something intently. Martinez was an old friend, someone Hawthorne had worked with on several joint operations over the years. "Find something interesting, Carlos?" Hawthorne asked, walking over to join him. Martinez looked up with a strange expression. "You could say that. I just had the most interesting conversation with Mrs. Henderson from the Memorial's Research Department. She was telling me about some visitors they've been having lately, people coming to look up names on the wall." "Visitors?" "Yeah. Apparently, there was a woman here this morning, before the ceremony. She was asking about a specific name, panel 23W, line 47. Mrs. Henderson said the woman knew exactly where to find it, like she'd been here many times before. Hawthorne felt a chill run down his spine. Panel 23W was directly behind where the homeless woman had been sitting. Did Mrs. Henderson say anything else about this woman? Just that she seemed to know a lot about the person whose name she was looking for? Like, a lot more than you'd expect from just reading the basic information on the wall. Martinez paused, studying Hawthorne's face. You look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? Hawthorne was quiet for a moment, processing this information. What name was she looking for? Martinez consulted his notes. Someone named Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, killed in action in Iraq 2003. But here's the interesting part, Mrs. Ben. Henderson said the woman who was asking about her seemed to know details about Rodriguez's service that aren't in any of the public records. Specific operational details that would only be known by people who served with her. The pieces were starting to come together in Hawthorne's mind, but they formed a picture he didn't want to accept. The woman's bearing, her educated speech, the way she'd looked at his medals, the military-style jacket, and now this connection to a fallen soldier. Carlos, he said slowly, I think I may have made a mistake this morning. The next morning found Admiral Hawthorne in his Pentagon office earlier than usual, staring at his computer screen with growing unease. Sleep had eluded him the night before as Colonel Martinez's words echoed in his mind. The possibility that he had treated a fellow veteran with such disrespect ate at him. But more than that, there was something about the woman's demeanor that suggested his mistake might be far more significant than a simple case of mistaken identity. He had started his investigation by accessing the memorial's visitor database, using his clearance to pull information that wasn't available to the general public. What he found made his stomach tighten. The woman had been visiting the memorial regularly for over 3 years, always going to the same panel, always spending exactly 37 minutes sitting on that bench. Security cameras had captured her on dozens of occasions, and in every image she maintained the same respectful posture he had witnessed yesterday. But it was the military database searches that truly shook him. Cross-referencing the timestamps of her visits with personnel records, he discovered that she consistently appeared at the memorial on specific dates: March 15th, July 4th, November 11th, and December 23rd. Veterans Day made sense, as did Independence Day, but the other dates seemed random until he dug deeper into Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez's service record. March 15th was the date Rodriguez had been killed in action. December 23rd was her birthday. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, his coffee growing cold as the implications settled over him. This wasn't some random homeless woman who had stumbled onto the memorial grounds. This was someone who had maintained a 3-year vigil for a fallen soldier, someone who knew intimate details about Rodriguez's service and death.
His phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Martinez. Found something you need to see. Can you meet me at the archives in an hour?
The National Archives building was only 20 minutes away, but Hawthorne found himself driving slowly, dreading what Martinez might have discovered.
The colonel was waiting for him in one of the secure research rooms, surrounded by file folders and looking distinctly uncomfortable. Richard, Martinez said without preamble, I think you need to sit down for this. Hawthorne took the offered chair, noting the serious expression on his friend's face. In 20 years of working together, he had rarely seen Martinez this grave. I spent most of last night going through classified personnel records, Martinez began, opening the thickest folder on the table. I started with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, trying to understand the connection. Maria Rodriguez was a combat medic attached to a special operations unit in Iraq. Highly decorated, exemplary service record. Died saving the lives of 6 wounded soldiers during an insurgent attack. That's all very tragic, Hawthorne said. But I'm not sure how this relates to the woman from yesterday. Martinez pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. It showed a group of soldiers in desert camouflage, posed in front of a military vehicle. Rodriguez was in the center, a compact woman with intelligent eyes and a confident smile. This photo was taken 2 weeks before Rodriguez was killed, Martinez said. But look at the soldier standing next to her. Hawthorne studied the image, focusing on the figure Martinez was indicating. It was a tall woman with short blonde hair, wearing the distinctive uniform of a military sniper. Even in a grainy photograph, there was something unmistakably familiar about her bearing and posture. The hair's different, and she's obviously lost weight since then, Martinez continued. But I'm pretty sure this is your homeless woman from yesterday. Hawthorne felt the blood drain from his face as he looked more closely at the photograph. Despite the changes wrought by time and hardship, the bone structure was the same, and those pale green eyes were unmistakable. Who is she? He asked, though he was no longer sure he wanted to know the answer. Martinez opened another folder and pulled out a heavily redacted personnel file. Sergeant Elena Vasquez, Army Special Forces sniper attached to the same unit as Rodriguez. And Richard, when I tell you what's in this file, you're going to understand why yesterday was probably the worst mistake you've ever made. The first page of the file contained basic biographical information. Elena Vasquez, born in El Paso, Texas, enlisted at age 19. Exemplary marks in basic training, selected for sniper school, deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq multiple times between 2001 and 2006. But it was the commendation section that made Hawthorne's hands start to shake. 203 confirmed kills, Martinez read aloud. That's not a typo, Richard. 203. She's one of the deadliest snipers in American military history. Hawthorne stared at the numbers, unable to process them fully. He had spent his entire career in the Navy, most of it in administrative roles, and had never fired a shot in anger. The woman he had dismissed as a vagrant had more combat experience than most entire units. How is that possible? He managed to ask. She was deployed for 5.5 years across multiple tours, Martinez explained, primarily in Iraq but also Afghanistan and several classified operations. Her commanding officers describe her as having an almost supernatural ability to read terrain and anticipate enemy movements. She was credited with saving hundreds of American lives through strategic elimination of high-value targets. Martinez turned to another page in the file, and his expression grew even more serious. But here's where it gets complicated. In December 2006, her unit was compromised during a classified operation. Rodriguez and 4 other soldiers were captured by insurgents. Vasquez spent 18 hours behind enemy lines, systematically eliminating hostiles while coordinating with a rescue team. Did she get them out? She got 5 of them out. Rodriguez was executed by the insurgents before Vasquez could reach her position. Martinez paused, letting the weight of that information settle. The after-action report describes what Vasquez did next as unprecedented in its scope and precision. She continued engaging enemy positions for another 6 hours, effectively destroying the entire insurgent cell. 47 confirmed kills in a single engagement. Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what he was hearing. The woman he had treated with such contempt had not only served with extraordinary distinction, but had fought desperately to save the very soldier whose name she now visited at the memorial. What happened to her after that? He asked. Martinez's expression darkened. That's where the story gets really tragic. She was awarded the Silver Star for her actions that day, but the psychological impact was severe. She blamed herself for Rodriguez's death, convinced that if she had moved faster or anticipated the ambush better, her friend would still be alive. PTSD, among other things. She completed her enlistment, but the reports from her final year of service paint a picture of someone who was struggling severely with survivor's guilt and trauma. She was recommended for psychological counseling multiple times, but apparently refused treatment. Martinez pulled out another document, this one much more recent. After her discharge in 2007, she essentially disappeared from official records. No VA benefits claims, no contact with veteran services, no permanent address. The few times she surfaced in the system were always related to psychiatric emergency holds or brief stints in homeless shelters. Psychiatric holds? 3 times in the past 15 years. Always the same pattern. Someone would find her talking to herself, apparently reliving combat scenarios. She'd be hospitalized for a few days, stabilized on medication, and then disappear again before any real treatment could begin. Hawthorne felt sick to his stomach. The woman he had dismissed as a vagrant was actually a war hero struggling with the invisible wounds of her service. Worse, she was visiting the memorial to honor a fallen comrade she blamed herself for failing to save. There's more, Martinez said quietly. I spoke with Dr. Sarah Chen at the VA Medical Center this morning. She's one of the few doctors who has treated Vasquez during her brief hospitalizations. According to Dr. Chen, Vasquez has been living on the streets for over a decade, refusing help because she doesn't believe she deserves it. Doesn't deserve it?
She's convinced that her survival when so many others died was a mistake.
Dr. Chen says this is common among combat veterans with survivor's guilt, but Vasquez's case is particularly severe because of her role as a sniper. She was responsible for life and death decisions on a daily basis for years, and Rodriguez's death shattered her confidence in her own judgment. Martinez closed the file and looked directly at Hawthorne. Richard, this woman has more combat experience and more confirmed enemy kills than most generals. She's risked her life for her country more times than we can count. And yesterday, you treated her like she was garbage. The weight of his mistake was crushing. Hawthorne had built his career on the assumption that rank and position equated to worth and respect. He had looked at a decorated war hero and seen only a homeless nuisance, never bothering to look beyond the surface, or consider that appearances might be deceiving. "I have to find her," he said quietly. "That's not going to be easy." According to the people at the memorial, she doesn't follow any kind of regular schedule except for those 4 annual visits. She could be anywhere in the city, or she might have moved on entirely. Hawthorne was already reaching for his phone. "I have resources. Security cameras, police contacts, veteran outreach programs. Someone has to have seen her. And what exactly are you going to do when you find her? Apologize for treating a war hero like trash and hope she forgives you." The question hit harder than Martinez probably intended. What could he possibly say to make up for his behavior? How do you apologize to someone for failing to recognize their service and sacrifice? How do you explain that your prejudice blinded you to their worth? "I don't know," Hawthorne admitted. "But I have to try." Martinez nodded slowly. "I'll help." "But Richard, you need to understand that this woman has been betrayed by the system more than once. The military failed her when she needed psychological support. The VA failed her when she needed medical care. Society failed her by allowing a war hero to live on the streets. She's not going to trust easily, and she has every right to tell you to go to hell." "I know." Hawthorne stood up, his mind already racing with plans. "But I can't live with myself if I don't at least try to make this right." As he left the archives building, Hawthorne realized that finding Elena Vasquez was only the first challenge. The real test would be earning the forgiveness of a woman who had every reason to hate him, and finding a way to honor someone whose service had been overlooked by the very system he represented. What he didn't yet understand was that Elena Vasquez's story was far more complex than even the classified files revealed, and that his encounter with her would expose secrets about military operations and personal sacrifice that would challenge everything he thought he knew about honor and duty. The search for Elena Vasquez consumed Admiral Hawthorne's every waking moment for the next week. He had mobilized every resource at his disposal, calling in favors from police contacts, reaching out to homeless shelters, and even putting out discreet inquiries through veteran service organizations. But Elena seemed to have vanished as completely as she had during her years of active service behind enemy lines. It was Captain Walsh who finally provided the breakthrough. She had been working with a local veteran outreach coordinator named Michael Torres, a former Marine who spent his days walking the streets and building relationships with homeless veterans who avoided traditional services. Torres knew Elena, though he had never learned her real name or military background. "She calls herself Lisa," Torres explained during their meeting at a downtown coffee shop. "Been trying to help her for about 2 years now, ever since I started seeing her around the industrial district. She's different from most of the vets I work with." "Different how?" Hawthorne asked, leaning forward intently. "Most homeless vets, they've got obvious signs of their service. They'll talk about their deployments, wear old military gear, mention their MOS. Lisa never talks about the military at all, but everything about her screams professional soldier. The way she moves, how she scans a room when she enters, where she chooses to sit. She's hypervigilant in a way that only comes from real combat experience." Torres paused to sip his coffee, studying Hawthorne's face carefully. "Mind if I ask why a Navy admiral is so interested in finding one homeless woman? This isn't standard procedure for you guys." Hawthorne had prepared for this question, but finding the words was still difficult. "I made a mistake. A serious one. I need to make it right." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that shows a man his own character flaws in the worst possible light." Hawthorne met Torres's gaze directly. "I treated her with disrespect because I made assumptions based on her appearance. It turns out she's a decorated veteran who deserves better from all of us, but especially from me." Torres nodded slowly. "That happens more than you'd think. People see the homeless part and miss everything else about who these people are." He pulled out a worn notebook and flipped through several pages. "Lisa's got a routine, kind of. She moves around a lot, but there are certain places she gravitates toward. Problem is, she's been spooked lately." "Spooked?" "Yeah, about a week ago, she started acting more paranoid than usual, changing her patterns, avoiding places where she normally felt safe. My guess is something happened that made her feel exposed or threatened." Hawthorne felt a stab of guilt. His encounter with her at the memorial had probably triggered a defensive response, causing her to go even deeper underground. In trying to maintain his own image and authority, he had inadvertently made her situation worse. "Where should I look for her?" he asked. Torres was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't give out this kind of information. These people have a right to their privacy, and some of them are hiding from things that could genuinely hurt them if they're found. I understand your concern, but I give you my word that I mean her no harm. Quite the opposite.
Your word as an officer?
My word as a man who realizes he has a lot to learn about honor. Torres seemed satisfied by this response.
He tore out a page from his notebook and wrote down several addresses.
These are places she's been seen recently. But Admiral, if you do find her, please remember that she's been through trauma that most of us can't imagine. Approach her carefully and don't be surprised if she doesn't want to talk to you. That afternoon, Hawthorne began his search in earnest. He had changed out of his uniform into civilian clothes, driving his personal car rather than an official vehicle. His first stop was an abandoned warehouse district, where Torres had indicated Elena sometimes took shelter. The area was a maze of empty buildings and overgrown lots, exactly the kind of place someone might choose if they wanted to avoid contact with other people. He found signs of recent habitation in several locations, empty food containers, carefully arranged sleeping areas, evidence of small fires, but no sign of Elena herself. What struck him was the military precision with which these temporary camps were organized. Each site was positioned to provide multiple escape routes, clear sightlines in all directions, and protection from the weather while remaining hidden from casual observation. As the sun began to set, Hawthorne moved on to his second location, a stretch of urban parkland along the river. Torres had mentioned that Elena sometimes came here to fish, using improvised equipment to supplement her diet. The park was mostly empty at this time of day, with only a few joggers and dog walkers taking advantage of the cooler evening air. He was about to give up and move on to the next location when he spotted movement near a cluster of trees close to the water's edge. A figure was sitting motionless on the bank, so still that Hawthorne had almost missed her entirely. Even from a distance, he recognized Elena's posture and the way she held herself alert despite appearing relaxed. As he approached, staying well back so as not to startle her, he could see that she was indeed fishing with a makeshift rod assembled from scavenged materials. Her shopping cart was positioned nearby, but now he noticed details that had escaped him during their first encounter. The cart was organized with military efficiency, everything secured and arranged for quick movement. Her clothes, while worn, were clean and maintained as well as circumstances would allow. She knew he was there, long before he got close enough to speak. Without turning around, she said, "You're either very persistent or very stupid, Admiral. Maybe both." Hawthorne stopped walking, remaining about 20 feet away from her position. "May I come closer? I'd like to talk to you. Talking wasn't on your agenda last week. As I recall, moving along was the preferred option." Her voice was steady, but Hawthorne could hear an edge to it that suggested she was prepared to disappear at the first sign of trouble. He raised his hand slightly, showing that he carried no weapons and meant no threat. "I came to apologize," he said, "and to ask for your forgiveness." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fishing line motionless in the water. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Apologize for what, exactly? For doing your job as you saw it? For maintaining the dignity of an important ceremony? For protecting real veterans from the presence of undesirable elements?" Each word hit like a physical blow, made worse by the fact that she was using his own language from their encounter. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About everything. About who you are, about what you've done, about what you deserve. And what exactly do you think you know about who I am?" Hawthorne took a careful step closer. "I know your name is Elena Vasquez. I know you served with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know you have more confirmed enemy kills than most entire units. And I know that Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was your friend, and that you blame yourself for her death." Elena's fishing rod went still in her hands, and for the first time since he had approached, she turned to look at him directly. Her pale green eyes were unreadable, but there was something dangerous in her expression that reminded him that he was talking to one of the deadliest soldiers in American military history.
You've been busy, Admiral.
Digging through classified files, talking to people who should know better than to share that kind of information. The question is, why? What do you want from me? I want to make this right. You shouldn't be living like this. You're a war hero who sacrificed everything for your country, and the system has failed you. I failed you. Failed me? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Admiral, the system didn't fail me. I failed the system. I failed Maria. I failed every soldier who counted on me to keep them safe." She set down her fishing rod and stood up, and Hawthorne was again struck by her height and the fluid way she moved. Even after years of homelessness and whatever struggles she had endured, she still carried herself like the elite soldier she had been. You want to know what really happened in Iraq? What those classified files don't tell you. She took a step toward him, and Hawthorne had to resist the urge to step back. Maria Rodriguez was captured because I made a mistake. I was supposed to be watching the perimeter, providing overwatch for the team. But I was focused on a target 800 meters out, some insurgent commander I'd been tracking for weeks. She paused, her gaze distant as she relived the memory. While I was playing sniper games, Maria's team walked into an ambush. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. She died because I chose glory over responsibility. That's not what the after-action reports say, Hawthorne replied, carefully. They say you saved 5 lives that day, after I got my friend killed. Elena's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. The 5 people I saved should never have needed saving. If I had been doing my job properly, that ambush never would have happened. Hawthorne realized he was seeing survivor's guilt in its most extreme form. Elena had taken responsibility not just for the things she couldn't control, but for circumstances that were beyond any reasonable expectation of prevention. She had turned her extraordinary skills as a soldier into a source of self-condemnation rather than pride. Elena, he said gently, what happened to Rodriguez wasn't your fault. War is chaos. Good people die despite everyone's best efforts to save them. Easy words from someone who's never been there. She picked up her fishing equipment and began packing it into her cart. You want to apologize, Admiral? Apology accepted. You want to make something right? Leave me alone. As she prepared to leave, Hawthorne realized this might be his only chance to reach her. What if I told you there was a way to honor Rodriguez's memory? A way to make her sacrifice mean something? Elena paused in her packing, though she didn't turn around. I'm listening. There's a new program starting up, designed to help combat veterans transition back to civilian life. They need someone with real experience to help design the training protocols. Someone who understands what soldiers actually go through in combat. Plenty of people fit that description. Not with your specific experience. Not with your understanding of the psychological impact of high-stress operations. Hawthorne paused, choosing his next words carefully. They need someone who understands how good soldiers can blame themselves for things beyond their control. Elena was quiet for a long time, standing motionless beside her cart. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Maria wanted to be a doctor when she got out. Said she was tired of patching people up in war zones and wanted to heal people in peace. She turned around, and Hawthorne could see tears in her eyes. Maybe if there had been better support systems, better understanding of what we were going through, she would have made it home to pursue that dream. Maybe this is a chance to make sure other soldiers do make it home to pursue theirs. Elena studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was sincere or simply manipulating her. Why do you care, Admiral? A week ago, you couldn't get rid of me fast enough. Because a week ago, I was a different man. Meeting you, learning who you really are, seeing how badly I misjudged you, it's forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself and the assumptions I've been making my entire career.
She nodded slowly, seeming to accept the honesty of his response.
This program you mentioned. Who's running it? The Department of Veterans Affairs in cooperation with several military branches. They're looking for consultants with combat experience to help develop more effective treatment protocols. And you think they'd be interested in hiring a homeless sniper with PTSD? I think they'd be honored to work with a decorated veteran who has first-hand knowledge of both combat trauma and the failures of current support systems. Elena was quiet again, processing this information. I'd need time to think about it, and I'd need guarantees that this isn't some charity case, that they actually want my professional expertise, of course. But Elena, there's something else you should know. Hawthorne took a deep breath. I've been doing some research into Rodriguez's family. She had a younger brother who's currently serving in Afghanistan as a medic, just like she was. Elena's composure cracked for the first time since he'd found her. David? He was just a kid when Maria died. He's Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez now, and according to his commanding officer, he credits his sister's example with inspiring him to serve. He doesn't blame anyone for what happened to her, Elena. He honors her memory by continuing her work of saving lives. The tears were flowing freely now, and Elena made no attempt to wipe them away. She would have been so proud of him. She would have been proud of you too, for surviving when survival seemed impossible, for carrying on when everything inside you wanted to give up. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since their conversation began, there was hope in her expression.
This program.
When would it start? 3 weeks later, Admiral Hawthorne sat in a conference room at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Watching Elena Vasquez present her analysis to a panel of military psychologists, program directors, and senior officers. The transformation was remarkable. Clean clothes, professional bearing, and most importantly, the confidence of someone who knew her expertise was valued and needed. But the real revelation came when Dr. Brabe subdrew. Patricia Morgan, the VA's Chief of Psychiatric Services, asked Elena to elaborate on her recommendations for treating what she called precision trauma, the specific psychological injuries sustained by snipers and other specialists whose jobs required them to make life-and-death decisions in split-second time frames.
Traditional PTSD treatment focuses primarily on processing traumatic experiences, Elena explained, using a laser pointer to highlight key sections of her presentation. But for precision specialists, the trauma isn't just about what they experienced.
It's about the weight of responsibility they carried and the impossibility of perfect decision-making in combat situations.
She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of psychological profiles from different military specialties. A sniper doesn't just deal with the trauma of taking lives. They deal with the mathematics of life and death, the geometric calculations of wind speed and bullet drop, the biological reality that their decisions determine who lives and who dies from distances that can span half a mile or more. General Patricia Hayes, who was leading the panel, leaned forward with interest. Can you give us a specific example of how this differs from conventional combat trauma? Elena was quiet for a moment, and Hawthorne could see her steeling herself for what was clearly a personal revelation. In conventional combat, soldiers react to immediate threats. They fire at muzzle flashes, return fire when fired upon, respond to direct dangers. The psychological framework is self-defense and unit protection. She paused, looking directly at the panel. For a sniper, every shot is a deliberate decision made with complete information and extensive time to consider alternatives. When I eliminated targets, I knew their names, their ranks, their families. I could see their faces clearly through my scope. I made conscious, calculated decisions to end human lives based on intelligence reports and strategic objectives. The room was completely silent as the implications of her words settled over the panel members. The psychological weight isn't just about killing, she continued. It's about the precision of killing. Every shot I took, I knew exactly what it would accomplish and exactly what it would cost. There was no heat of battle, no split-second decisions. Just cold, mathematical precision applied to the ultimate moral question. Doctor, Morgan nodded slowly. And when something goes wrong in that framework, when something goes wrong, you can't blame circumstances or chaos or the fog of war. Elena replied. You blame the calculations, you blame the precision. You blame yourself for not being precise enough, smart enough, fast enough. Her voice caught slightly. You replay every variable, every decision, every factor you might have missed. She clicked to the next slide, which showed brain scans comparing different types of combat trauma. This is why traditional PTSD treatment often fails with precision specialists. We're not just processing traumatic memories. We're questioning our fundamental competence at the one thing we were trained to do better than almost anyone else on the planet. General Hayes exchanged glances with Dr. Pubnick. Morgan. Ms. Vasquez, these insights are extraordinary. How did you develop this understanding? Elena looked down at her hands, and Hawthorne realized she was about to share something she had probably never told anyone before. Because I lived it, she said quietly. For 5.5 years, I was responsible for making those calculations, those decisions. 203 confirmed kills. Each one a deliberate choice based on strategic objectives and threat assessment. She looked up at the panel. And then I made a mistake that cost my best friend her life. She clicked to the final slide, which showed a single photograph. The same group shot Colonel Martinez had shown Hawthorne weeks earlier, with Elena and Maria Rodriguez standing side by side. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was captured and executed by insurgents while I was engaged with a different target. According to every official analysis, her capture was unavoidable, the result of intelligence failures and enemy tactics that no one could have predicted. Elena's voice was steady, but Hawthorne could see the effort it was costing her. But for a sniper, unavoidable doesn't exist. Everything is a calculation, and if someone dies on your watch, it means your calculations were wrong. Dr. Morgan leaned forward. How did you cope with that? How did you continue functioning as a soldier after that incident? I didn't cope, Elena replied matter-of-factly. I completed my tour, accepted my decorations, and then spent the next 15 years convinced that my survival was a mistake. I believed that if I couldn't be perfect at the one thing I was trained for, then I didn't deserve the life that Maria and others had lost. The room was quiet for a long moment before General Hayes spoke. Ms. Vasquez, what you're describing isn't just theoretical analysis. You're giving us a case study of how precision trauma manifests and how current treatment approaches fail to address it. That's correct. And based on my research and personal experience, I believe we need completely different therapeutic approaches for different types of combat specialties. Eleanor stood up straighter, her professional confidence returning. A tank driver needs different support than a medic, who needs different support than a sniper, who needs different support than a pilot. She moved to a whiteboard and began sketching out a framework that was clearly the result of years of thought and analysis.
What I'm proposing is role-specific therapy that addresses the unique psychological demands and trauma patterns of different military specialties, combined with peer counseling from others who have performed the same roles.
Admiral Hawthorne watched in amazement as Elena outlined a comprehensive program that addressed gaps in veteran mental health care that he had never even considered.
This wasn't just the insight of someone who had suffered. This was the expertise of someone who had spent years analyzing her own trauma and understanding its broader implications. The current approach treats all combat trauma as essentially the same, Elena continued. But a medic who couldn't save a patient carries a different type of psychological injury than a pilot whose mission resulted in civilian casualties, which is different from a sniper who questions whether a specific kill was justified. Morgan was taking notes rapidly. This could revolutionize how we approach veteran mental health care. The specificity of treatment based on military role and the nature of trauma exposure. There's one more element, Elena said, and her tone became more personal again. Survivor's guilt in precision specialists isn't just about random survival. It's about mathematical survival. We survived because we were better at killing than the people trying to kill us. That's a specific psychological burden that requires specific therapeutic approaches. General Hayes stood up. Ms. Vasquez, I think I speak for this entire panel when I say that what you've presented here today is groundbreaking. We'd like to offer you a position as senior consultant for our new precision trauma program. Elena looked surprised. I thought this was just a consulting contract. It was, until about 30 minutes ago, General Hayes replied with a smile. Now we're talking about building an entire program around your insights and expertise. After the meeting, Hawthorne found Elena standing outside the building, looking up at the afternoon sky. She seemed different, not just because of the professional clothes or the successful presentation, but because something fundamental had shifted in her bearing. How does it feel? He asked, joining her on the sidewalk. Strange, she replied honestly. For 15 years I've been convinced that my survival was a mistake, that I didn't deserve the life that Maria lost. Today was the first time I considered that maybe I survived for a reason. What reason? Elena turned to look at him, and he could see a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe I survived because someone needs to help other precision specialists understand that perfection isn't possible, even for people trained to be perfect. Maybe Maria's death and my survival weren't random events. Maybe they were part of something larger that I was too broken to see until now. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Elena spoke again. Admiral, can I ask you something? Of course. That day at the memorial, when you told me to move along, what would you do differently if you encountered the same situation today? Hawthorne considered the question carefully. I would ask your name. I would ask if you needed help. I would ask about your connection to the memorial instead of assuming I knew what you were doing there.
He paused.
Mostly, I would listen instead of making judgments. And if you found out I was a homeless veteran with PTSD, I would ask how I could help instead of how quickly I could make you disappear. Elena nodded approvingly. Good answer. Because here's what I learned today that I want you to understand. My homelessness wasn't a failure of character or a lack of motivation to get better. It was a symptom of a specific type of trauma that the system wasn't equipped to address. She stopped walking and faced him directly. The woman you met at the memorial wasn't a vagrant looking for sympathy. She was a war hero who had been systematically failed by every support system that should have helped her, until she believed that living on the streets was what she deserved. Hawthorne felt the full weight of his mistake settling over him again. Elena, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, Admiral. Be better. Use what you learned from this experience to change how you see other people who don't fit your expectations of what a veteran should look like. She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it was a genuinely hopeful expression. Besides, you did something today that no one else has done in 15 years. What's that? You gave me a reason to believe that Maria's death might have meaning beyond just being another casualty of war. If this program helps even one precision specialist avoid the path I took, then maybe her sacrifice contributed to something larger than we understood at the time. As they parted ways, Hawthorne realized that Elena Vasquez had taught him more about honor, service, and leadership in a few weeks than he had learned in decades of military career. The homeless woman he had dismissed as unworthy had turned out to be not just a war hero, but a teacher whose lessons would change how he saw service and sacrifice for the rest of his life. But there was still one more revelation to come, one that would complete the transformation of both Elena's life and Hawthorne's understanding of what it truly means to serve. 6 months later, the National Veterans Memorial was once again prepared for a ceremony, but this time Admiral Hawthorne approached the preparations with a fundamentally different perspective. As he walked the grounds in the early morning light, he noticed details that had escaped him before. The way the memorial's design created spaces for quiet reflection, the careful placement of benches to accommodate visitors who needed to rest, and the sightlines that allowed people to spend time with specific names without feeling exposed or rushed. Elena Vasquez's precision trauma program had exceeded all expectations, helping hundreds of veterans who had been failed by traditional treatment approaches. But more than that, her work had begun to influence military training itself, helping active duty soldiers understand the psychological demands of their specialties before they encountered trauma rather than trying to treat the damage afterward. Today's ceremony was different from the political and diplomatic events Hawthorne usually organized. This was the dedication of the new Precision Warriors Memorial, a section of the larger memorial complex specifically designed to honor the unique service and sacrifice of snipers, forward observers, combat medics, and other military specialists whose jobs required split-second decisions under extreme pressure. The guest list included families of fallen precision specialists, active duty soldiers from various elite units, and veterans who had struggled with the specific psychological challenges Elena had identified. But the guest of honor was Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez, Maria's younger brother, who had requested leave from his deployment in Afghanistan specifically to attend this ceremony. As Hawthorne watched Elena speaking with David near the memorial wall, he was struck by how much both of them had changed. Elena had regained not just her physical health, but a sense of purpose that had transformed her from a broken homeless veteran into one of the military's leading experts on combat psychology. David, now a decorated medic himself, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found meaning in continuing his sister's work of saving lives. Admiral Hawthorne? The voice belonged to Colonel Martinez, who had arrived early, as he always did for important ceremonies. Good morning, Carlos. Everything ready? More than ready. But I wanted to talk to you about something before the ceremony begins. Martinez gestured toward a quiet area away from the growing crowd. I received some interesting information yesterday that I think you should know about. They walked to a secluded bench, and Martinez pulled out a folder that looked suspiciously similar to the classified files he had shown Hawthorne months earlier. I've been doing some additional research into Elena's service record, Martinez began, specifically looking into the classified operations that weren't included in her standard personnel file. Hawthorne felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. What did you find? Well, it turns out that our Elena Vasquez is even more remarkable than we realized. Martinez opened the folder to reveal a series of documents marked with classification levels Hawthorne rarely saw outside of the Pentagon's most secure briefing rooms. Operation Night Guardian, Martinez read from the first document, December 2005 through March 2006. Elena was attached to a Joint Special Operations Task Force conducting deep reconnaissance and targeted elimination operations against high-value terrorist targets.
I thought we knew about her deployments.
We knew about her regular deployments. This was different. A volunteer program for the most elite snipers from all service branches. Elena was one of only 12 soldiers selected for the entire program. Martinez turned to a page filled with target photographs and mission summaries. During Operation Night Guardian, Elena was responsible for eliminating 17 high-value targets across 3 countries. According to the mission reports, these weren't just enemy combatants. These were terrorist leaders whose deaths directly prevented planned attacks on American civilians. Hawthorne studied the documents, noting the level of detail and the strategic importance of each mission. How many lives were saved by these operations? Conservative estimates suggest over 3,000 American and Allied lives, based on intelligence about planned attacks that were disrupted when their leadership was eliminated. Martinez paused to let this information sink in. Admiral, this woman didn't just serve her country with distinction. She personally prevented multiple terrorist attacks on American soil. The magnitude of Elena's service was overwhelming. Hawthorne had already learned to respect her as a decorated combat veteran, but this revelation placed her in a completely different category of heroism. There's more, Martinez continued. The reason these operations were classified wasn't just because of their sensitive nature, it was because of their success rate. Elena's precision and intelligence-gathering capabilities were so extraordinary that the program became a model for how special operations conducts targeted elimination missions.
He turned to another section of the documents, showing detailed analysis of Elena's operational methods. She developed new techniques for long-range reconnaissance, target verification, and extraction that are still being taught at special operations schools today.
Her contributions to military tactics and strategy go far beyond her individual kill count. Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Does Elena know that her methods are still being taught? That's the interesting question. According to the program directors, Elena's innovations were so significant that they wanted to bring her back as an instructor after her combat deployments ended. But by the time they were ready to make the offer, her psychological state had deteriorated to the point where she was no longer responsive to official communications. Because of Maria's death. Exactly. The timing was particularly tragic. Elena's guilt over Maria's death prevented her from seeing the broader impact of her service. She became so focused on the one mission she couldn't complete perfectly that she lost sight of the thousands of lives she had saved through her precision and expertise. As Martinez closed the folder, Hawthorne realized that Elena's story was even more complex than he had understood. She wasn't just a veteran struggling with survivor's guilt. She was a tactical innovator whose contributions to military science had been lost when the system failed to provide adequate psychological support at her moment of greatest need. Carlos, does the current special operations community know about Elena's current work? They do now. In fact, there's been some discussion about offering her a position as a civilian contractor, specifically to help develop new training protocols that incorporate her understanding of precision trauma. Before Hawthorne could respond, he noticed Elena approaching their bench. She moved with the same fluid grace he had observed from their first meeting, but now it was the confident stride of someone who knew her worth and her place in the world. Admiral Coleman Martinez, she said, nodding to each of them. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Actually, Martinez said, we were just discussing your service record, specifically some aspects of your career that might not have received the recognition they deserved. Elena's expression became guarded. My service record is what it is. I did my job to the best of my ability, and I accept responsibility for my failures. What if I told you, Hawthorne said gently, that your innovations in reconnaissance and precision tactics are still being taught to special operations personnel around the world? Elena looked surprised. That's impossible. Most of my operational reports were classified, and my methods were developed for specific mission parameters. Martinez reopened the folder and showed her several pages of current training documents. Operation Night Guardian became a case study in precision warfare. Your techniques for target verification, environmental assessment, and extraction planning are now standard curriculum at the special operations schools. As Elena read through the documents, her expression gradually shifted from surprise to something approaching wonder. These are my mission reports from 2005 and 2006. Your mission reports, Martinez confirmed, and the analysis of how your methods prevented 3 separate terrorist attacks on American civilian targets. Elena was quiet for a long time, reading through page after page of analysis and implementation reports. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. I never knew, she said quietly. After Maria died, I stopped paying attention to operational analysis. I assume my work had ended with that failure. Elena, Hawthorne said, your work didn't end with Maria's death, it was transformed by it. The precision trauma program you developed has already helped hundreds of veterans, and your tactical innovations have saved thousands of lives over the past 15 years. She wiped her eyes and looked toward the memorial wall where Maria's name was etched in black granite. She would have laughed at the irony. She always said I was too focused on the technical aspects of warfare and not enough on the human elements. Maybe, Martinez suggested, your current work combines both, the precision of your military expertise with the human understanding that came from your own struggles. As they prepared for the ceremony to begin, Elena asked to spend a few minutes alone at Maria's panel on the memorial wall. Hawthorne and Martinez watched from a distance as she placed a small American flag beneath Maria's name and spoke quietly to herself for several minutes. When she returned, her expression was peaceful in a way Hawthorne had never seen before. I used to come here because I felt guilty, she explained. Guilty that I had survived when she didn't, guilty that I couldn't save her, guilty that my precision had failed when it mattered most. And now I come here to remember what she taught me.
that precision without compassion is just mathematics, and that the true measure of a soldier isn't perfection, but the willingness to keep serving even after experiencing failure.
The ceremony itself was unlike any military event Hawthorne had ever attended.
Instead of focusing on abstract concepts of honor and duty, the speakers talked about specific challenges faced by precision specialists and the importance of understanding that perfection isn't a realistic expectation in warfare. Elena's keynote address was particularly powerful. She spoke directly to active duty soldiers and veterans about the psychological demands of their specialties, the importance of seeking help when needed, and the difference between tactical precision and personal perfectionism. Military precision, she explained, is about applying the best available techniques to accomplish specific objectives under dynamic conditions. Personal perfectionism is about demanding impossible standards from yourself and accepting responsibility for outcomes beyond your control. She paused, looking directly at several young soldiers in the audience. I spent 15 years believing that one tactical failure negated 5 years of successful operations. I'm here today to tell you that your worth as a soldier and as a person isn't measured by your ability to control uncontrollable circumstances. But it was her final words that would stay with Hawthorne long after the ceremony ended. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez died doing what she had trained to do, saving lives under impossible conditions. Her death wasn't a failure of my precision or anyone else's tactical decisions. It was the inevitable result of placing good people in impossible situations and asking them to do their best with incomplete information and limited options. She looked toward the memorial wall where Maria's name was visible in the afternoon sunlight. The best way to honor our fallen comrades isn't to achieve impossible perfection in their memory. It's to continue their work of protecting and serving others, and to help our fellow veterans understand that survival isn't a mistake. It's an opportunity to serve in new ways. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, David Rodriguez approached Elena with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you did to try to save her, for everything you've done since then to honor her memory, and for helping me understand that my survival in Afghanistan doesn't mean I failed the soldiers I couldn't save." Elena embraced him, and Hawthorne realized he was witnessing the completion of a healing process that had taken nearly 2 decades to unfold. Later, as Elena prepared to leave the memorial grounds, she stopped beside the bench where Hawthorne had first encountered her months earlier. "Admiral," she said, "I want you to know that everything that happened between us, your initial dismissal, your investigation into my background, your efforts to find me and make amends, all of it was necessary for me to reach this point." "I'm not sure I understand. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through someone else's eyes before we can recognize our own worth. You saw a homeless veteran with 200 confirmed kills, and that forced me to confront the disconnect between my service and my situation." She smiled. "It took your perspective to help me understand that my homelessness wasn't a reflection of my character. It was a symptom of untreated trauma that could be healed." As Elena walked away from the memorial for what might be the last time as a homeless veteran struggling with guilt and self-doubt, Admiral Hawthorne understood that their encounter had transformed both of them in ways neither could have anticipated. He had learned that honor isn't measured by rank or position, but by the willingness to recognize one's mistakes and work to correct them. She had learned that survival isn't a punishment for outliving others, but an opportunity to serve in new and meaningful ways. And Maria Rodriguez's sacrifice had gained new meaning. Not as a failure of tactical precision, but as part of a larger story about service, loss, healing, and the possibility of finding purpose even in the aftermath of tragedy. The homeless woman with 200 confirmed kills had become Elena Vasquez, Ph.D., Director of Precision Trauma Research and one of the military's leading experts on combat psychology. But more than that, she had become living proof that even the most broken heroes can be healed when they're finally seen and valued for who they truly are.